Right now in South Korea, we are diving headfirst into a dating saga that sounds like it was ripped straight from a satirical novel, but nope, this is real life and it is serving up a masterclass in modern, absurd relationship dynamics. Picture this scenario: a blind date meticulously set up for individuals navigating their late 30s and early 40s, a demographic often looking for something a bit more serious, perhaps. On one side, we have our protagonist, a gentleman from a perfectly ordinary, let us call it average background. On the other, his date, a woman hailing from a seriously affluent family. Think gold spoon status, the kind where financial worries are, shall we say, a distant concept, a luxury they can afford to ignore. They connect, they decide to see each other, and they date for a respectable 3 months. Now, 3 months is no small stint in the dating world. It is long enough to build some rapport, explore shared interests, and, one would hope, establish a sense of mutual effort and investment. It is a period where you would expect to see some reciprocity, some shared ownership of the experience. But here is where the plot thickens and then promptly curdles. In this particular arrangement, the give and take was so profoundly one-sided it makes a balancing scale look like a perfectly even contest. Our man, bless his heart, was the sole financier of every single meal. Not a coffee, not a shared appetizer, not a single bite was paid for by her, and it did not stop there. After each culinary expenditure, he became the designated chauffeur, the personal driver tasked with ferrying her home every single time. Imagine the logistical effort, the fuel costs, the precious evening hours spent driving back and forth, all on his dime and his time. It was essentially him performing a service, a prolonged, unpaid internship in boyfriend duties. After 3 months of this relentless, one-way expenditure, a significant investment of his resources, he finally threw in the towel, citing that the whole arrangement was simply too much to handle. But here is what nobody is talking about, because hearing this, your immediate reaction might be a bewildered, okay, but why would she actually demand all this? What is going on inside her head, or more broadly, what is driving this kind of behavior? And the answer, as blunt as it is, lies at the intersection of human nature and the relentless, pervasive influence of ruthless capitalist market dynamics. In societies like South Korea, where success is often rigidly defined by financial metrics, life itself can feel like a constant, aggressive competition. Everything becomes commodified: your skills, your time, your attention, and yes, even your relationships. People are not just climbing ladders, they are aggressively fighting for their slice of the financial pie, and this mentality seeps into every facet of existence. So, in this context, the woman, accustomed to a life of privilege and accustomed to having her needs met without question, viewed the man not as a potential partner to build a life with, but as a service provider, a walking atom, a personal chauffeur. She saw him as the hoga, the sucker, the fool, the walking wallet expected to pay for the privilege of her company, her time, her presence. It was not about affection, it was about maintaining a lifestyle, and he was the designated atom and chauffeur for that lifestyle. He was, in her transactional view, an investment that was supposed to deliver convenience and status. This is where we start asking the crucial why, because the Korean women's very being, in this warped system, seems to become the ultimate problem, where their upbringing and societal conditioning equate to an expectation of constant, unreciprocated provision. Here is the part that completely broke people's brains, because this brings us to the deeper cultural context, the fertile ground that allows such dynamics to flourish. In South Korea, social stratification is stark, and the concept of the gold spoon versus the dirt spoon is not just a saying, it is a palpable reality that shapes expectations. Individuals raised in affluent households often grow up with an innate sense of entitlement, a subconscious expectation that the world and the people in it will cater to their needs and desires with a certain level of ease and luxury. This is not necessarily malicious intent, but rather a deeply ingrained consequence of their upbringing, a normalization of receiving without giving. So, when they enter the dating arena, this expectation follows them. The gold spoon woman in our story likely saw her background as a standard, a baseline, and her partner's role was to meet, if not exceed, that standard. If the man from an average background could not provide that premium level of service, paying for every meal, providing constant transport, then, in her eyes, he was the one falling short. The relationship was not a partnership, it was a service contract, and he was failing to meet the agreed-upon terms. It is the commodification of romance taken to its extreme, where a woman is perceived, value dictates the mandatory investment from her suitor. Think about it like purchasing a high-end product. You expect premium service, a certain level of attentiveness, and a seamless experience. In this scenario, the woman saw herself as the premium product, and the man was expected to deliver that flawless, high-cost customer service, a constant return on her perceived value. And this is where the whole thing falls apart. So what happened when the lady got precisely what she expected, or rather, what her upbringing had conditioned her to believe she was owed? This is where the cosmic irony truly hits, and the whole situation performs a spectacular backfire. The man, the designated service provider, the hogo who was expected to continuously fund this one-sided arrangement, eventually reached his absolute financial and emotional breaking point. He could not sustain the relentless investment, the endless meals, the constant driving, the emotional labor of being a glorified butler. He realized the transaction was unsustainable. He ended the relationship. Now, cue the predictable defenses from some corners. Oh, the man simply could not handle it. Or the classic, he should have dated someone of a similar financial background. This perspective conveniently sidesteps the woman's own agency and the fundamental imbalance she created. It frames her expectations as natural and his inability to meet them as his failure. But the real holes appear when we examine the societal structure that enables this. Where is the mutual respect? Where is the concept of a partnership? This extreme transactional approach completely negates genuine connection, turning intimacy into a business deal that inevitably collapses when one party can no longer afford the terms of service. The hypocrisy lies in expecting a reciprocal emotional investment when the entire foundation was built on a one-way financial transaction, with one party consistently underpaying for the services rendered. It is a classic case of wanting all the benefits without any of the responsibility, a distorted view that makes a mockery of genuine human connection. This whole dynamic, this transactional approach to dating where people are assessed and utilized based on their perceived financial utility, is far from exclusive to South Korea. While they might have a particularly sharp, almost clinical way of enacting it, the underlying principles are universal. You see echoes of this in the global sugar daddy and sugar baby phenomenon, where financial arrangements are explicit, but here it is subtler, masquerading as conventional dating. Think about historical arranged marriages among European aristocracy, where unions were less about love and more about strategic financial mergers and land acquisition. The core logic is identical, calculating perceived worth, assessing expected financial returns, and treating potential partners like assets or liabilities in a complex personal portfolio. The man in our story was not just looking for love, he was likely drawn into what he perceived as a potentially rewarding, albeit high-cost investment opportunity. When the expected returns, emotional connection, reciprocal effort failed to materialize, and the costs, financial and emotional, began to skyrocket, he did what any rational investor would do: he cut his losses. He realized the market was rigged against him, that the product he was investing in was not delivering the promised value, and frankly, who can blame him for realizing he was essentially running a one-man support service for someone else's lifestyle? Now, let us project ourselves into the future and imagine the ensuing farce if this trend continues unchecked. What does dating look like down the line? We are likely to see an epidemic of relationships crumbling not due to a lack of love, but due to a fundamental inability to meet escalating investment requirements. People will become hyper-calculating, viewing every date, every gesture as a potential expenditure or a strategic move in a high-stakes financial negotiation. Genuine emotional bonds will become increasingly rare, like finding a unicorn in a stock market report. This will inevitably lead to a surge in cynicism, profound loneliness, particularly as individuals age and the societal pressure to settle down with someone financially stable intensifies. The gold spoon woman might find herself perpetually adrift, searching for that mythical, ever-flowing financial fairy tale, perhaps settling for another transactional relationship or ending up alone, having traded genuine connection for a fleeting illusion of security. Meanwhile, the average guy, burned by such experiences, will likely retreat further, opting out of the dating game altogether, wary of being seen as anything more than a potential atma, a disposable service provider. It is a bleak outlook, but one that feels increasingly plausible when relationships are reduced to balance sheets and ROI calculations. Ultimately, this entire situation boils down to a rather stark, almost farcical misinterpretation of what a relationship is. It is like walking into a 5-star, Michelin-starred restaurant expecting the most exquisite, multi-course, world-class dining experience imaginable. You anticipate the finest wine, the most attentive service, a culinary journey that transports you. And then, when the bill, likely astronomical, finally arrives, you throw a dramatic fit, perhaps even storming out, exclaiming, "Wait, I have to pay for all of this? Are you kidding me?" But here is the ultimate kicker, the punchline that seals the absurdity of it all. The chef, the sommeliers, the entire team who prepared this opulent feast were all just waiting for you to foot the bill for their entire careers, their years of training, their exorbitant operational costs. In the end, everyone involved just walks away hungry, financially depleted, and utterly bewildered, blaming the menu, the waiter, the chef, the restaurant manager, anyone but their own wildly unrealistic and one-sided expectations. And that, my friends, is the modern dating game, played with real money and real emotions, distilled to its most ridiculous transactional essence. Fuel the truth at dating in Korea. Support the structure. Stay safe in the lounge.